families, creating a lifetime of memories. Sadly, some families are denied these important moments due to the sad practice of alienation. These are families divided.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Families Divided TV. If you have never subscribed to our YouTube channel, if you'll click on the subscribe button below, that would be great. We would really be appreciative of that, and we really want to help as many people as we can. We put much content on this YouTube channel. We're already over 200 videos for you. And if you want to be notified when the videos are published on here, then click on the bell and you will get notifications immediately as soon as we add them to our YouTube channel. Thank you much. I also want to invite you to our conference coming up. We're going to hear from Dr. Sue Kornbluth today. She's one of our presenters at the conference. Our conference is entitled Alienation, the Truth Regarding the Trauma and the Abuse. It is a virtual, it's international, and we've got people really excited and registering now. I encourage you to do so. It's a 2.5-day conference. We will start on Friday night and go straight through Sunday night, and literally we'll be into the night doing things. So much to do, many great presentations. 10 of the top experts in the world will be joining us, and these presentations are powerful. We need to know more about abuse and trauma of alienation, and literally, honestly, this will be the best conference we've ever had. So I hope you'll be able to join us. We really look forward to it. I've spent a lot of time and energy into it just to make it special for you. So I hope you'll join us. In today's presentation, we're going to be hearing from Kenny Weiss, and this is the first time you've heard from Kenny. So we're really looking forward to that. When there is parental alienation, there's codependency. Most people think of a codependent as the typical needy people pleaser type. Did you know there is a complete polar opposite? What is called the falsely powered codependent, which looks just like a narcissist in many ways. Many times the alienating parent is the falsely empowered codependent. If you're not aware of this type of codependent, this presentation is going to help you to understand what you're up against. And so in this presentation, Kenny's going to share the characteristics of the falsely empowered codependent. We're looking forward to that, and also hearing from Dr. Sue Kornbluth right after these messages.
Divorce and co-parenting are a major life interruption for families, especially the kids, but also for parents and grandparents. And it's even worse in blame-filled, high-conflict cases. When parents engage in alienation by turning the kids against the other parent or grandparents, kids suffer. They're denied the opportunity to build the 4 big skills necessary for future resilience. New Ways for Families online class can help. Parents learn to use our popular BIF and EAR skills to calm the conflict and stop the hostile emails and texts. And we even have a class for kids and parents to learn together. Research shows a 75% improvement in joint parental decision-making after this course is taken, plus overall improvements for kids' well-being. Don't wait to make this affordable investment in your children's future and improve your well-being too. Start learning new ways for your family today at conflictplaybook.com.
Sadly, too many know the pain and trauma associated with parental and grandparent alienation. Family Access, Fighting for Children's Rights, will present an important international virtual conference on October the 13th through the 15th, 2023. Alienation, the Truth Regarding the Trauma and Abuse will feature world-renowned experts in the field of alienation. You'll join conference event coordinator Elaine Cobb and moderator Megan Hunter as they introduce you to keynote speaker Dr. Edward Crook. Plus, you'll hear important presentations from Dr. Joshua Coleman, Lisa Rothfuss, Dr. Mary Alvarez, Chris Smith, Bill Eddy, Dr. Sue Kornbluth, Dr. William Burnett, Melanie Gill, and Megan Hunter. Join the many attendees already securing their spot for the conference. Alienation: The Truth Regarding the Trauma and Abuse. Visit familyaccess.info for all the details. This special conference is being hosted by Family Access, Fighting for Children's Rights, by Still Partners Foundation, and by PA is CA. Parental alienation is child abuse.
There's a very unknown side to codependence. Most people are fully aware of the typical, what's called the disempowered codependent, who is, very needy and clingy and is a people pleaser and can't say no, tends to get run over in relationships, and is the uber nice person who ends up suffering, feeling abandoned and neglected and misunderstood and taken advantage of other people. While that side is very prevalent and very normal, what very few people understand is it has its polar opposite, what is called the falsely empowered codependent. And it's been my life experience that the reason people struggle in relationships and struggle in life is because they're not aware of it. The only person I'm aware that has even, discovered this or talked about it is a lady named Pia Melody. To me, she's the foremost expert in codependence. And if you've never heard of her, if you've never read her book, Facing Codependence, then you don't know about codependence. And when I see people teach and talk about codependence, they only talk about the disempowered. And what they don't realize is, there is a polar opposite, the falsely empowered. And what our society holds up as the well-adjusted, successful adult in almost all cases is the falsely empowered codependent. These are your CEOs. These are your people who've achieved the most. They are doers. They are achievers. And people are completely unaware of how dysfunctional. I say that as lovingly as possible. We're all perfectly imperfect. We all have wounds and imperfections. And our society is just vastly undereducated about this side of the dynamic. And as I said, if you're unaware of this, it makes relationships nearly impossible. It's why I think the divorce rate is so high, is because people don't know, at least it's been my life experience, we've all been raised codependently, and we either adapt as the typical disempowered or the falsely empowered. The old opposites attract. What you usually have is the disempowered love addict with the falsely empowered love avoidant. And if you're unaware of that, that's probably why your relationships, your marriage, your friendships, your coworkers, everything is such a struggle because you don't know about this dynamic. So that's what I'm going to tackle today is, give you the basics of this dynamic. Again, I learned all of this from Pia Melody. She's retired now, but she has a center called The Meadows in Wickenburg, Arizona. She has, 3 books out, and it's my personal opinion. If you have not read her 3 books, Facing Codependence, Facing Love Addiction, and Intimacy Factor, your chances of having a loving, successful relationship are nearly impossible. I literally believe that every college student, the first class they should take is on those 3 books. It is that important to learn about these dynamics if you want to understand relationships and what how she calls a moderate and mature relationship looks like. And so hopefully you'll walk away from this with a much deeper understanding of why you've struggled in relationships. And if you've been with someone like this, life will make sense and you won't feel so alone, but you'll also have an idea of what's been happening, and maybe it'll spur you to, as I always, invite people, is go become an expert. That's the only way we can turn these dynamics around as we have to learn about them. So I'm just going to get right into it and describe some of the main characteristics of the falsely empowered codependent. And one of the main things they do is, well, there are many main things they do, but they will deny their own feelings. They tend to see feelings as a weakness, and they will tend to have a lack of empathy for others' emotions. These are the people that, say, I just leave my, feelings out of the boardroom. Well, that, first of all, that's a complete lack of understanding of how the brain and body works. Every thought we ever have, doesn't matter what it is, starts with an emotion. We know that neuroscientifically. So the person in the boardroom who thinks they're just thinking their way through a situation doesn't recognize that it's actually their emotions, and the emotions mostly from childhood, that are influencing every single thought and decision they make. And so, but because, the typical stoic male, and now we're training women to become this way as we push this new message to women to go be a boss babe, they're becoming men. And so they're very detached emotionally. Like, though, if you read the books about how to become a boss babe, they're training women to shut off their emotions and become, a falsely empowered codependent. That's the new model we're teaching women, is to create a falsely empowered codependent. All right. So the reason they lack this empathy for others' emotions and their inability to express emotions or minimize the value of emotions is because they're so invested in achieving what's called other or outside esteem. They need approval and validation from others. And this is why their careers and the successful people, it's why it's so important to them, and they work 80 hours a week and they strive so much, is underneath all of this is very low self-esteem and very high shame. And so the way they cover over that is through exterior achievement, exterior pursuits. So their primary focus is what's called outside intensity. I'm going to get into what creates this falsely empowered codependent. It all starts in childhood. But emotion and connecting intellectually, spiritually, sexually, emotionally is too scary for them. And so they put all their investment in outside pursuits, meaning anything else is more important than the relationship, because a relationship would require an emotional investment, and that's much too petrifying for them. So most often it's their career that they make their primary focus, or it's their outside pursuits and hobbies. These are the people that have to stay busy and always be doing something. They can't sit still. They can't be present in the moment. They can't just be. They have to do. They are doers. And if you take that doing away from them, all of those suppressed emotions, all the pain from childhood starts to surface. Well, as I said, I'll get into how parenting created this falsely empowered codependent. And since that parenting style was so suffocating and debilitating, it's overwhelming to them. So they're constantly trying to avoid emotions within themselves, even connecting to themselves emotionally and connecting to others. And a wonderful way to do that is through pursuing outside achievement, outside validation. Now, the way men primarily avoid this intimacy and connection is through their work, through their hobbies. They will tend to have sexual affairs. They will tend to be addicted. And here's the thing about addiction is most people just think alcohol, drugs, porn, like the typical type of addictions. But our society condones tons of addictions that aren't healthy for us. You're seeing a massive rise in animals. Like, animals are great, but people are addicted to their animals. Their primary relationship is with their animals because they can't connect to another human being. It's too scary. You see this with working out, with dieting, all of these different, it can be a cause that, is a very, loving cause, whether it's church or some sort of support group or something like that. But, addiction is at its core Addiction is an attempt to soothe intolerable emotional pain. And so, like I said, our society condones many addictions. It's great if you work out. I don't mean to disparage anyone, but David Goggins, the former is he a Army beret, or he's in the military. He's massively addicted to, like, he'd do these 100-mile marathons in one day, and the next day it'd do a 200-mile extreme training event. Like, it's just this addiction to constantly destroy himself, because if you knew his childhood history, which he talks about openly, his dad was horrifically abusive. So now he's just turned that abuse on himself. He's now the perpetrator of his own self-abuse, which is what happens. So addiction, I make this point because most people only think the extreme addicted person who's on the street and is broke and destitute. Almost everybody on the planet is addicted to something, and our society just condones most addictions and says these ones are healthy. But at the core is what happens if you take that process away. And usually there's loneliness, emptiness, there's a tremendous pain, and that's the heart of the addiction. It's not just a pursuit they enjoy, it's a pursuit they need. Okay. So that's what men tend to use, and they'll use money and intellect and charm or gifts to control and manipulate and have power over others, because that's at the heart of this other side of codependence. It's a power dynamic. Whereas the disempowered, just think of the terms, disempowered, the typical codependent gets run over. The falsely empowered is all about control and all about having power over somebody. So those are the primary ways that men use their false empowerment over other people. Women, on the other hand, primarily use sex or dangle the carrot of sex. You see that, Instagram, Facebook, provocative pictures. Some are, salacious and act on it, but many the women will primarily use suggestive sexuality to gain power and control over somebody. Women use their kids most often. They hyper attach, they over focus, they over connect and smother, and they have a primary relationship with their children because it's a power dynamic. Our children have to give us what we want, but to actually connect to an adult is too scary. And so, you're seeing more men do this again with the shift in society, but that's primarily what women do. You'll see this on Facebook. The child is graduating from 6th to 7th grade, and the mother, exclaims, "Oh my God, my little baby's leaving me." Whether they recognize it or not, they're losing power. Their child is growing out and being independent. I saw one woman on Facebook who spent the first week of college with her daughter, and her posts were like this long, detailing everything they did. She couldn't let go. She had a primary addicted relationship to her daughter and wasn't going to let that go, and was lamenting the loss of this relationship. Well, that's not our job as a parent. A healthy, intimate connection with our child is one where we give them the skills and tools to go off on their own. We don't want them trapped with us, connected to us. A healthy, mature parent raises a child to separate and to pursue life on their own. They don't try and keep them next to them with that level of connection. Women also tend to connect more deeply to animals. You see this in dating profiles. Women will, most of their pictures are about their animals. Most of their comments are about their animals. Their animal is everything to them. Well, again, that's an avoidance of, it's a power dynamic, because no matter how badly you treat your animal, or if you're gone, that animal is always at your beck and call the second you walk in. It's a power dynamic. You never have to give. You only have to give when you want, but the animal always gives to you. That's not healthy intimacy. That's an avoidance of intimacy. Women will tend to have more emotional affairs, but that's changing too as we, train women to become, more masculine and take on the traits of the typical love avoidant and falsely empowered codependent male. They will also get sick and hurt. And this is hard for people to hear. They're like, no, I got sick and hurt. It has nothing to do with my emotions. Well, we know, the medical community has done an incredible disservice to the world because they only focus on biology. There's study after study after study. Do the research. Nearly every single health condition is because of an unhealed emotional situation. Almost all health issues, whenever you're sick or hurt, there's something going on emotionally that's not being dealt with. I talk about that in my book, how I didn't know this. This was, and most of this getting sick and hurt is subconscious, but my mother was an alcoholic. And I'll never forget the day I made this connection before I did all the research and found out how true it is. Once I found out my mom was an alcoholic as a kid, for years, I was in and out of hospitals. I was constantly sick and hurt. Finally, one day, my back went out and I was in the garage. I was stuck on the garage floor and I was screaming at my mom to come help me because my crutches were up in the rafters. And finally, I screamed out, and I'm going to swear here, pardon me, but this is exactly what I said was, you selfish son of a bitch, when are you going to stay sober long enough to take care of me? And I still get chills. I just got hit. In that moment, I realized, oh my God, after all the years of being sick and hurt, this day was the one and only time my mom was drunk. I realized in that moment, I had been making myself sick and hurt for years to control my mother's drinking, because if I was sick and hurt, she wouldn't drink. Now, again, that's a whole different topic, but this is a primary way. Both men and women do this, but women primarily who, can't connect emotionally, they'll get sick and hurt because it's a way to get care without investing back. It's a wall, and that's at the heart of the falsely empowered codependent, is a wall. And they're always using techniques to keep that wall up. Okay. Again, with women, like I said, they'll tend to have more emotional affairs, but now you're seeing, they're much more invested in outside interests, outside hobbies, and both men and women, falsely empowered, tend to label, judge, and criticize others, or they're just indifferent and authoritative. This is the man or woman who can leave a relationship like that. It's over and they're just done. They're like, yeah, I'm done with it. And people are like, aren't you upset? No, I'm over it. Because they were never in it. That's why it's so easy for them to leave a relationship and not be affected by it. They're indifferent. They will also use rage and anger as a means to control people. They can be highly explosive. So there can be the kind of stoic, indifferent, you're upset and they're just kind of bland and blank, or the polar opposite of where, they're complaining and angry about everything. All right. So the common thread with both of, this type of male and female dynamic, these types of codependents, is they're trying to control and shape others' thoughts, feelings, and actions. And they do anything possible to avoid emotional, physical, intellectual, and sexual intimacy to keep control and distance. Or if they are sexual, it's a very detached, they can't connect intimately. They use it as a vice, not as a way to create love and connection. Again, they tend to have addictions. And as I said, addictions, you're working 80, 90 hours a week, that's an addiction. That's not a passion. That's when there's that lack of balance, that's a lack of maturity and moderation. Now, do we all have periods where we're starting a business and it requires that? But these are the people that live this way all day, every day. And if they can't, work at that and pursue that outside esteem, outside achievement, they're miserable. And again, they're trying to avoid all the shame and pain and low self-esteem that's hidden under the surface of their doing and of their achieving. As I said, their addictions can be to their kids, it can be animals, it can be working out seemingly normal, healthy things that are condoned by our society. And again, this is all to hide their fear of intimacy and connection. They're also, as I said, get sick and hurt a lot to control and receive love and affection from others, but it also allows them to not have to give it. When you're sick and hurt, there's no expectation of you taking care of somebody or listening to them or being a part of their life. It's a one-way street. Now, what's so difficult about the falsely empowered codependent is they are almost impossible to treat because they believe they have everything together. They have the trappings of success. They have the car, they have the house, they have the 401k, the trophy husband or wife, the 2.3 kids, the dogs, they go on trips, they do all these great things. So again, our society condones this and isn't aware of this type of codependence. And so, their personal belief is, I don't have any issues at all. And any perceived problems are always because of other people. It couldn't be me because look, I have all of this outside achievement and outside esteem and outside intensity to validate that I'm okay. So they almost never admit they're wrong, and it can be virtually impossible to hold them accountable. They just shake it off. They're not interested. Again, they fall back on their trappings of success as validation that, no, I'm good. And so whatever you're upset about, you're just overreacting. That's about you. This is wrong. And so, pardon me, there are a couple things involved here. One of the biggest reasons the falsely empowered can't receive help is because of what they went through in childhood. This is all childhood trauma based. So they were either spoiled, they were parentified, meaning maybe they were a latchkey kid or a single parent, and they had to take on the role of raising brothers and sisters or cooking and cleaning. They had to become an adult too soon. That's a power dynamic. Wow, I'm 7 years old. I'm 10 years old. I'm acting like mom or dad in the house. They couldn't stay a child. They had to become parentified. That's a power dynamic. Or they could have been smothered or enmeshed. Those were the mothers, the Facebook mothers that I mentioned earlier. And so what happens with these, the helicopter parent, the overly attached parent, the parent who spoils the child, the overlove, the over smothering. What I want you to picture is this: an umbilical cord. And an umbilical cord is meant to feed the child nutrients. Well, in an enmeshed dynamic, a parentified, a spoiling dynamic that creates this falsely empowered codependent, flip it. Mom and or dad or both are sucking the emotional life out of the child for themselves. That's the mother who couldn't separate from her child as she went off to college. She was she was living her life vicariously through her child, over loving, just smothering emotionally. And that's what creates this, because it creates two confusing things for the child. One, wow, my mom really loves me. My dad really loves me. I must be really special. But wait a minute, that's an awful lot of responsibility. And hidden underneath that is, if I have this much power, who's taking care of me? Nobody. And that's what's so scary for the falsely empowered codependent to get into reality and face these issues, is they'd have to do two things. One, they'd have to be intimate. They'd have to be vulnerable. They'd have to be emotionally available. Well, look at what happened to them as a child. when they were emotionally available. The life got sucked out of them. It destroyed them. They were pawns used for somebody else's benefit, which ultimately means they were horrifically abandoned. It's fascinating. I'll see people, talk about, they'll make comments on my videos and go, well, I know this kid and their childhood was perfect. They were spoiled. Our society thinks spoiling a child is love. That's exactly what creates a narcissist. It is not kind, it is not loving, but that's how distorted our society is on codependence and healthy parent-child relationships and relationships in general, is they don't realize, wait a minute, spoiling a child is about the parent. They want to overinflate the child's worth because then it's a mirror, a reflection of, I must be a great parent. It's a pure manipulation of the child and using the child for their own benefit. It is of no value to the child. Children need boundaries. They need consequences. They need to suffer through their mistakes so that as an adult, they have the skills and tools that they learn. It's much easier to experience the consequence of a bruised knee versus now you're out on your own and you sleep with somebody in the college dorm room because you didn't know how to say no or take care of yourself because mom and dad did everything for you. And now you have a child. Like a perfect example was I flew into Denver and they have this train that takes you between concourses. And there was this young boy, probably 5, 6 years old. And the train starts to move and he lets go of the handrail and he's like, kind of surfing. He's gonna, wow, I'm gonna test this out. This is kind of fun. And his mother just freaked out, just screamed, grabbed him, no, like panic, pure terror, grabbed him, startled him, made him grab the rail again. What that was is a mother's fear of if something happens to him, it projects onto me. And instead of allowing, this is a wonderful opportunity for a 5-year-old to recognize, because when those trains stop, it's jarring. The kid most likely would fall down. What's the worst thing that could happen? He'd bruise his bottom, he'd bruise his knee. He'd kind of go, oh, and mom could then go, so what did you learn today? Well, maybe I need to hold on. See, that's the parent who smothers and enmeshes. They don't let a child experiences the consequences of life when they're just bruised knees. They need to suck that emotional life out of the child because of mom was afraid. That was mom's fear because mom was probably hyper controlled in the exact same way. So she's just doing what she was taught. She's not intentionally being a mother that's creating a falsely empowered codependent. We don't teach these things, but that's how simple it happens. For me, I'll never forget walking into the store at I was 6 years old. I can still see right where we were in the parking lot. My mom's holding my hand and she looks down at me and she says, Kenny, I take you for granted. Now, I didn't know what being taken for granted meant, but I remember the feeling, the overwhelming responsibility of, wow, my mom overvalues me and I have a tremendous responsibility to keep my mom happy. It was devastating to me. That's how simple these dynamics get created. My mother's intent was to be loving and kind, but since we don't know how to properly affirm a child and show our love, we, in many cases, inadvertently create these dynamics, okay? So that's why it's so hard for the falsely empowered to get help, because to get help means they'd have to re-experience that sense of vulnerability. Well, that was the loss of their life, their emotional life. It was too costly. And so they create, to hide that deep, low self-esteem and shame, they create this false persona, which was mostly projected onto them by mom and dad, that they're better than, that they're above it all, as a way to protect feeling all of that. Also, the cost of it was so severe as a child, they'll do anything to avoid it. And that's why they have so much outside intensity. That feeling for them is overwhelming, where the typical disempowered, they were primarily abandoned. And they'll do anything. They're very easy to treat. They're very successful in treatment because they just want to figure it out. The falsely empowered doesn't even want to admit there's something wrong, because that would put them in that weakened, disempowered state that their emotional life was sucked out of them, and they do everything to protect that. And that's the facade they create, and that's why they become so successful. All right. So because so few people teach about this, or even are aware of the falsely empowered codependent, what many people don't realize is they incorrectly assess somebody as a narcissist or label them as a narcissist when in fact they're a falsely empowered codependent. They look almost identical and they act almost identical. They're very similar. Now there's some key distinctions, and I have a video on my YouTube channel titled, "Are They a Codependent or a Narcissist?" where I break down the differences between the two. But there's this new rise in, calling everyone a narcissist, and very few of them actually are. We are really raising a society of, there is more narcissism. That's true with social media, but many are misdiagnosed or mislabeled as a narcissist because people aren't aware of, this falsely empowered codependent. So if you think you've been with a narcissist, I urge you, educate yourself more deeply on the falsely empowered codependent, because in most cases, that's who you're dealing with. So now I want to talk about the 5 levels of codependence that Pia Mellody identifies, when this holds true for either the disempowered or the falsely empowered, and how the symptoms of codependence show up in every adult's life. And the first one is a lack of self-care. The second one is a lack of boundaries. The third one is being out of touch with reality. The fourth is a lack of self-care. And finally, lacking maturity and moderation. So now I'm going to go through all 5 of these and share a little bit of what it looks like from the falsely empowered codependent side. How do they express a lack of self-love, boundaries, being out of reality, and lack of self-care, and a lack of maturity and moderation? When it comes to the self-love, they developed, as I said earlier, the other or outer esteem. They believe their value comes from the admiration from others and the adulation derived from their achievement and from their outside intensity, their outside pursuits. The achievement and the presentation of being confident, the presentation of being successful, the presentation of achieving and succeeding is a complete smokescreen to hide their deep shame and their lack of inherent worth. They will tend to see them, and you'll see this, where they will directly say they're better than others, but their attitude and persona and their demeanor directly communicates that they see themselves as better than others. They can tend to be arrogant and grandiose, or caught in the delusion of perfectionism and the delusion that they are flawlessly good. Now, you definitely see this, a sure sign of a falsely empowered codependent is a perfectionist. That's the deep underlying sense of shame and low self-worth, because their value is determined by your perception of whether they did this perfectly. And that's a complete lack of an ability to have grace and love that, look, we're human, we're limited, we're perfectly imperfect. Every single one of us on a daily basis makes mistakes. We are wrong. We do things to hurt others. And for the falsely empowered, they can't let that in, because they have to project that, oh no, I have it all figured out. Well, if a person is living in that false ideal, that's being out of touch with truth and reality. But true self-love, true self-esteem is also the ability to recognize I don't have self-esteem today. I don't like who I am. I feel really small and insignificant. That is a healthy marker of self-esteem. It's a recognition of the need for spirituality in our life, that, we are limited and we can't figure everything out and we don't always have the solution. Well, that's almost impossible for the falsely empowered to admit. And so the inability to admit that we're human, that we're limited, that we make mistakes, that at times we are all cruel, is an inability to love the self. It's a complete lack of recognition for the complete self. It's a banishment. This part of me, I will not look at, I will not accept, I will hide from the world, and even worse, hide from myself. Number two, a lack of boundaries. The falsely empowered are what's called anti-dependent or invulnerable. They rarely ask for help or admit to needing help. The falsely empowered tend to say no as a power play, whereas the disempowered can't say no. The falsely empowered says no a lot, but it's to seek power or to seek retribution. Their conscious and unconscious goal is always to gain power and control and to keep themselves safe. That's why they are boundaryless. They are walled off, and that you can't get in, you can't get close. That's not a boundary, that's a wall. Intimacy is not possible when a wall is present. And that's why they can be judgmental, critical, defensive, dismissive. They will often withhold information. That's one way to, because see, if I don't share information, you don't know what I'm really thinking and feeling. It's a great protection mechanism. And then, they can hide behind, well, I didn't lie, but withholding of information is a lie. If you know the information and you choose not to share it at a direct request, especially from an intimate partner, you are lying. You're hiding behind a wall, and intimacy is not possible when walls are present. So they are walled in and walled off, and they avoid intimacy by not allowing themselves to be known. Now, one of the biggest ways this shows up for the falsely empowered is how they are out of touch with reality. They are not in truth about how dysfunctional they are. Again, they think they are hyper successful, hyper achiever. They are the antithesis of dysfunctional. That detachment from truth and reality is almost scary at how out of reality they are. They are unconscious to their behavior and to their dysfunction and their perfect imperfections. They're deceiving themselves about who they are. The falsely empowered don't know or don't share their truth about what they think, feel, and believe, but they believe they do. And even if you hold it up to them, how they're deceiving you or they are false and incorrect about whatever they said, they will refuse to admit that truth. They will not live in truth. And they will say that they are very honest people and very open people, when in fact they are not, and they can't see or admit that truth, at how closed off, shut down, detached, authoritative, controlling, and hurt and broken they are. They leave out details, they avoid discussion or arguments, and they guard against letting others know them. But again, as I said earlier, the worst part of this is they don't even know themselves. They're defending against knowing themselves, yet they think they know themselves inside and out. That it's so hard to get them to see that and see that their behaviors and their actions, that they are not in reality of who they are and their effect on themselves or others. Their deep shame core gets covered over by their achievement and an overinflated belief in their competency. They use their success to deceive themselves that they're doing well in life. They stay busy to avoid reality and connection. They believe they are better than. They will resist recovery, rarely getting professional help because they don't think they need it. So if you're with that partner who says, oh, I don't need to talk to those guys, or women are crazy, none of that makes sense. Like that's a falsely empowered codependent. They will not succumb to anything that requires vulnerability or challenges their false reality. There is a massive wall to any outside input that might challenge the false persona and character they've created through the use of their outside pursuits, achievements, and outside intensity. As I said earlier, what's so sad is they're almost impossible to treat because they're so out of touch with the reality. And that pig-headedness, many people will often see them or mislabel them as a narcissist. They are very similar, but again, if you want to learn the difference, I'd encourage you to check out my YouTube channel and watch the video, Are They a Narcissist or a Codependent? Number 4, they lack self-care. The falsely empowered are needless and wantless. They won't ask for help because they don't think they need it. They don't want to appear weak, and therefore they tend to avoid interdependence, which is the free-flowing exchange of intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and sexual intimacy. It's usually top down, one up, walled off. You're constantly pursuing, they're constantly withholding. They don't want to appear weak because that would shatter the false image that they've created. So they tend to be disinterested. They're highly forgetful. They tend to be late all the time. A person who's late, that's all about power. People who are late are exercising power, and it all goes back to childhood of how they were enmeshed with and engulfed with by their parents. And so the only, their response to that is to keep somebody waiting. At the last minute, they make the choice to run back inside and send off this email. That's all about power. And because they're detached from reality, they won't admit that's what it's about. They know I just get crazy busy. They have all of these defense mechanisms to stay out of reality of how their behavior is about control and power over everybody else. Okay? So they will tend to be dismissive or even become angry at the request to care for others. And again, the way they lack self-care is the only way they know how to get care is to then create illness, get sick or hurt. That way they can get someone to care for them without being weak, without being vulnerable, and having a mutual exchange of intimacy. It's a manipulative power dynamic to get others to care for them. Finally, they lack maturity and moderation. The falsely empowered are overly mature. They are rigid. They are perfectionistic, obsessive, stubborn, and controlling. They are doers. They can't sit still and can't moderate their work-life balance. Addiction is also very common because addiction is a stunted emotional growth. And that's why it's a lack of maturity and moderation. And again, they use health issues as a way of controlling others. So that's a lot of information. It's, for most people, it's pretty overwhelming because now you're looking at, all of these people you run into your life and you're going, oh my gosh, this makes total sense. And again, it's been my experience that if a person isn't aware of both sides of codependence, once you learn about both the disempowered and the falsely empowered, I think you'll come to the same conclusion. You'll see every person on this planet is codependent, and you have people out on the spectrums, but most people bounce between the falsely empowered and the disempowered. And that's why there's so much discord in relationships and inability to connect and understand each other. And again, I would highly encourage you, if you want to feel peace inside yourself, if you want to feel peace in your relationships, as got taught to me by my mentor, it started for me when I came out of a physically and verbally abusive relationship, a marriage, was going through a divorce, and I studied a lot of history, a lot of psychology up to that point, but not enough. So I knew that even though her behavior was terrible and wrong, that was also a reflection on me. Like, how did I allow this person into my life? And so when I finished giving him an overview of why I was there and what had happened, I just flat out told him, look, I don't know how to be a man. And his words to me were, you know, Kenny, when I was in your shoes, I went and became an expert. That sentence changed my life. And from that moment on, that's what I've done. And if I've had a problem in my life, I struggle with both the disempowered and the falsely empowered. I bounce between two. Um, it's the only way I've been able to find peace and connection and safety in my life. And so if you don't have that, um, you know, I've created many resources. You can head to my website, kennyweiss.net. It's an overwhelming amount of free content to help you through these dynamics or any other dynamics that you're struggling with. So I hope if you have a friend who's been dealing with somebody who's sounds like this, I hope you share this with them so that they can have a better understanding of what might be happening in their life and what they might need to look at if they want things to turn around. So I hope that helps you all.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Sue Kornbluth. Many of you know me as an expert in high conflict divorce and parental and grandparent alienation. It was an honor for me to present at the 2022 Family Access Conference, and I'm going to present again and be with you in 2023. This year, we are focusing on a topic that is so crucial to your healing and moving forward to reconnect with your children. We are going to talk about how to help you move through the trauma and the emotional abuse that is caused by alienation. I am specifically going to be with you to focus on identifying and learning how to release the trauma and abuse that has been caused by alienation. There's no doubt in my mind that you have been through a lot of trauma. The loss of not having your children in your life, but still knowing that they are alive and they are out there and you can't get to them, can feel awful at times. It may even feel that your soul is being sucked out of you. But I don't want you to feel that on a daily basis. We help our clients to move through that and beyond that, and they have. And I'm going to bring to you this year the tips and tools that I use to move you through your pain. You have a right to your pain. You have a right to feel panicked and scared and depressed sometimes, but you don't want to stay there. So this year, I am going to talk to you about coping mechanisms that you can use to identify the trauma, identify the emotional pain, and then I'm going to teach you on how to release it. One of the best things to release the pain that is inside of you is to find out where it is being stored in your body. When I feel pain or I feel trauma, it always gets stuck in my head or in my throat. And I'm not able to say sometimes what I need to say. I wonder where yours gets located, and we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about acceptance and forgiveness and talking about things that you cannot change and are stuck where you are. But most importantly, I'm going to talk to you about how to empower yourself to release the trauma and the emotional pain that is inside of you. And the way that we do that is by identifying our emotional triggers and letting go of them. I look forward to being with you in 2023 with Family Access. Stay strong and remember, conflict doesn't cure conflict, compassion does.
In our next episode of Families Divided TV, Dean Tong speaks to us on the ins and outs of child forensic interviews.